my name is Niki Lemeshka, and I'm the Program Manager at the Georgia Commission on Family Violence. I'm joined today by Samar Abdelmageed, the Commission's data analyst. Today we'll be providing you with a short overview of a report the Commission recently released that provides data on family violence in Georgia between 2013 and 2017. This report represents an exciting development in our study of family violence in Georgia, as we have moved from looking at individual statistics to a more comprehensive approach to analyzing how our state is responding to the problem of relationship violence. So why are we looking at data? Well, for one, it's in keeping with the theme of this very conference. It's so we can grow the coordinated community response to family violence. We need to all be on the same page about this problem statewide. Our own experiences and perspectives on the way our individual agencies or communities respond is telling, but we know that the people we serve do not remain stationary. With 159 counties operating in different ways, it's good for us to take a pulse on how we're doing collectively. This is one of the many reasons that the State Plan for Ending Family Violence in Georgia recommended that we expand our abilities to collect and analyze family violence data. We also recognize that many of you look to the Fatality Review Project to provide an indication of how we were doing. Recent shifts in how the project operates may have left you feeling that there was a gap in information. This report is an extension of Fatality Review work. Looking at more types of data, not just fatalities, as well as data that's more recent, will allow us to focus on the context of abuse in Georgia, not just be reactionary. Data is valued, and it's grown even more valuable as we've shifted to evidence-based practices and data-driven decision-making. The data contained in this report does include some of what was useful to stakeholders from the Fatality Review Project's annual report. We will look at the domestic violence-related deaths and murder-suicides still, but we have also gathered information from the GBI to supplement that. Most of the report focuses on what we know about reported incidents of family violence, as well as what family violence looks like compared to the overall rate of violent crimes measured through index crimes. We will also look at data on temporary protective orders in our state. So all of the data we'll be discussing here today will be from the years 2013 to 2017. This time period represents our most recent comprehensive data set. Okay, so let's get into it. What you see here is a bar graph showing the total numbers of reported family violence incidents by year. The number appears to be relatively steady, so it's in the 60-ish thousand range each year. But there was actually a 6% reduction in family violence incidents over this 5-year period. In total, there were roughly 312,000 family violence incidents reported in Georgia during the 5 years. But I want to mention, these numbers represent reported incidents. We know that not every family violence incident is reported to law enforcement, so this very large number is actually an undercount as to the extent of the problem of relationship violence in Georgia.
After looking at yearly totals for family violence incidents, we break down data by looking at the demographics of family violence victims and perpetrators. We looked at the gender of offender and victim on the statewide level. You can see here that in 61% of reported incidents, the offender was male, and in 63% of the incidents, the victim was female. Again, a reminder that this data does encompass all family violence relationships and not just intimate partners, but our overall trend falls in line with national research, which has revealed that victims of intimate partner violence are disproportionately female and offenders are disproportionately male. As a country right now, we are having a lot of important conversations about race. As many of you know, research on the intersection of race and intimate partner violence is limited, but Georgia's victim data shows that Black women are victimized at higher rates than their peers of different racial backgrounds. You can see the graph on the right, which shows that roughly half of victims in reported incidents were Black or African American. Similarly, the offenders are also roughly half Black or African American. Where this is important is when you look at the demographics of our state. The state's population is roughly a third Black or African American. A lot is unknown about this data. What I want to make sure I am clear on is that we are not alleging that this is an issue that is occurring at higher rates in Black relationships. Remember that this data contains information about incidents reported to law enforcement, and it also contains information about family violence, not just intimate partner violence. What I think is interesting about this is that the body of research that does exist out there about race and IPV points to the Black community being less reliant on traditional systems for interventions. This may, on the surface, give appearances that may not be the case. But what we are missing here is information about how this case came to the attention of the police. This number could easily reflect a tendency for neighbors to call the police more on their Black neighbors, or for incidents where other races would fly under the radar that the Black community is experiencing higher rates of police contact. Or it could mean that Georgia data just looks different than what other research out there has taught us. There's a lot that is unknown here, but even in the face of the unknown, these data are important because this picture is in line with national research about the disparate impacts of abuse on Black communities, and we have a lot of work to do to address that disparity in terms of our resource allocations. It is important for us to remember that the way family violence data is reported in Georgia is in line with our state's definition of family violence, which includes both intimate partners as well as familial relationships, including parent and child, and people who have lived or live in the same household. Given that, you can see here that there are many other types of relationships represented in this data, other than current or former intimate partners. You can see here that roughly 3/4 of the relationships fall under the category of other. Georgia's Family Violence Incident Report includes multiple fields with the option for an officer to select other. The definition of other has not been properly defined. This means that we don't actually know what these relationships are. It is very likely that the bulk of the information about intimate partner relationships fall into the category other. So we are sadly missing a lot of our ability to differentiate among all the relationships that fall under here. This is a known flaw in the way that family violence was reported, but thankfully the system is improving.
We also know that in reported cases during the 5-year period, more than 3/4 of the incidents involved either no injuries to the victim, that's designated with the white star here, or only involved superficial injuries alone. This is an important finding because public awareness campaigns often highlight the physical aspects of family violence, often featuring black eyes and bruises. This image of the issue ignores many of the more prevalent aspects of family violence. Abusers' hands and fists are the weapon of choice in the majority of all reported family violence incidents. But you can also see here that other, as Samar was just talking about, again, is listed as the weapon of choice in 1/3 of cases. We'll circle back around to this in a bit, but I want to go ahead and point out the fact that the Navy section of the chart is firearms use. And they were reported to be used in less than 2% of cases during this time period. Many of us will agree that the most common misconceptions about domestic violence is that it's caused by substance abuse. I'm excited that we now have some data to get into this a little bit as we talk about this issue. We know that while there is often a co-occurrence of substance abuse and intimate partner violence, one issue does not cause the other. In fact, you can see here that less than 1/3, which is the white star there on the purple slice, less than 1/3 of these family violence incidents in Georgia involve alcohol or drug use. The bottom right chart shows the reported incidents that do involve the drug or alcohol abuse. So this is the data that's contained in that purple pie slice up top. Of those incidents that did involve substance abuse, it's the abuser that is under the influence 67.8% of the time. So they typically, you can see here the white stars. This is an abuser used alcohol 54%, drugs 11%, or alcohol and drugs 3%. Thankfully, knowing that children exposed to intimate partner violence experiencing long-lasting trauma, in reported incidents of family violence, children were directly involved in the incident only 21% of the time and were present for 33% of incidents. Unfortunately, the full extent of their exposure to Georgia family violence incidents cannot be accurately measured using the law enforcement reporting systems that were in place during the 5-year reporting period. What's missing for us is the number of children exposed. The data reflect the number of reported incidents where one or more children were present or involved. But what we do not know, well, actually, what we do know is that there were roughly 103,000 incidents where at least one child was present and 65,000 where at least one child was involved.
After looking at demographics and situational factors, we break down the incident data by systems responses. One of the most interesting things I think we are offering in the data is information about police action taken in response to family violence incidents. You can see that displayed here. The Navy section represents arrests. Georgia officers are not mandated to make an arrest in family violence incidents, but we are a preferred arrest state. And appropriately identifying the predominant physical aggressor and charging that person is the most effective intervention in family violence incidents. In fact, a law change will go into effect in January 2021, clarifying that Georgia officers will identify and arrest the predominant physical aggressor rather than the primary aggressor. While the data indicate that arrest is the most frequently occurring outcome, arrests represent only 30.8% of reported police responses. This means that in more than 2/3 of responses, preference was given to a different outcome. This graph includes the same information about police action taken, but it is showing that same actions over the 5-year period. The top line in navy blue, where I put the white star, represents arrests. When we look at the data in this way, the trend shows a decrease of 8.5% in the rate of arrest over time. Even more disconcerting, if you look where that second white star is, towards the bottom on the maroon line, there has been a significant rise, 52.2%, in the rate of reports in which none or no action taken was the officer's reported response. Being able to look at the trends within police response to family violence will really empower us with new information to engage in conversation and training with our law enforcement partners moving forward. Next, we will turn to temporary protective orders. Between 2013 and 2017, more than 126,000 family violence and stalking TPOs were issued statewide. What you can see here is a breakdown by type of order across that 126,000 TPOs. No surprise that the most frequently occurring types of orders were ex parte TPOs, with more than 60,000 family violence ex partes and just under 25,000 stalking ex partes issued during the 5-year period. One of the things that looking at these TPO numbers will allow us to do moving forward is to examine what the rate of ex parte orders being extended into longer term order looks like. We know that the longer the protective period, generally the better the outcomes for victim safety and offender accountability. So that extension rate can be an overall measure of the health of civil courts' responses to the problem of domestic violence. We want to see a high rate of ex parte TPOs move through the system and have those victims access 6-month, 12-month, or 3-year permanent orders. In Georgia, that overall extension rate is 55.5%, but the extension rate is 7.3% higher for stalking cases than for family violence cases. Extension rate can be impacted by many factors, including judicial discretion, failure to legally serve notice of the proceeding to the abuser, lack of legal representation, and victim decisions as to how or whether to proceed with a follow-up hearing. So while we cannot likely pinpoint specific issues by way of looking at the extension rate, it is a good overall measure of the judicial system's health on the issue of domestic violence.
There were 684 known domestic violence-related deaths in Georgia during this 5-year period. You can see here the rising trend line in maroon. This is representing the fact that the number of domestic violence deaths in Georgia increased more than 35% between 2013 and 2017. This is interesting because you may recall that the overall rate of reported domestic violence incidents dropped by 6%. Here we're looking at a subsection of those domestic violence deaths, the murder-suicide incidents that occurred statewide over the 5-year period. There were 155 completed and attempted murder-suicides between 2013 and 2017. Thankfully, we're seeing a slight decline in the numbers, about a 16% decline between 2013 and 2017. But we continue to take a very close look at murder-suicides because these incidents have a disproportionate impact on our overall rate of death. Murder-suicides represent 30% of all fatal incidents of domestic violence, but they account for 44% of all domestic violence-related deaths. We also know that these incidents often have deep impacts on surviving family members in the communities where they take place, which is precisely why we began our program to support survivors of murder-suicide a few years ago. So staying on our domestic violence-related deaths, this chart looks at the cause of death in those incidents. You can see here in the navy, which is firearms, and the lighter blue, which is law enforcement intervention by firearms, sometimes referred to as suicide by cop, that firearms accounted for 3/4 of all known domestic violence deaths statewide during the 5-year reporting period. If you'll think back to one of our earlier slides, we talked about weapons use in family violence incidents. And firearms were reported as the weapon of choice in only 1.8% of reported family violence incidents statewide. So looking at the data in this way, we're able to draw some conclusions that when firearms are present in a family violence incident, the risk of that incident becoming a fatal one is increased exponentially. Now, this is not shocking to anyone watching this video, I know. This finding has been consistently noted locally and in national research. We know there's a 500% increase in the risk of homicide when an abuser has access to a firearm. But it does remind us of how clear it is by the raw numbers that firearms and domestic violence do not mix. They were a deadly combination for 513 victims, offenders, and bystanders during this 5-year period alone.
Finally, we look at family violence data in the context of overall crime data. This chart displays the family violence incident rate, the green line at the bottom, in comparison to the overall rate of violent crimes statewide, known as index crimes. That's the navy line at the top. Index crimes, which include assault, burglary, larceny, murder, rape, robbery, and vehicle theft, are used as an indicator of the rate of violent crimes nationally. In Georgia, index crime data comes from the same uniform crime reporting system that supplies us family violence data. Many family violence incidents also qualify as index crimes, typically in the assault, rape, and murder categories. In Georgia, both index crimes and family violence incidents were on the decline during the 5-year reporting period. However, index crimes fell 12%, while family violence incidents were reduced at half that rate. Despite some duplication among the index crimes and family violence crimes because of that overlap, comparing the trend lines of index crimes and family violence incidents gives us some new insight into our state's effort to reduce violent crime and where to set future goals. We are already committed to continuing to evaluate this data for the remainder of the year. The plan is to release another report later this year that will contain similar information to what we just went over, but broken down to the judicial district level. That will provide us some great opportunities to isolate any specific districts that have responses that significantly vary from the norms. For example, on the right side of the screen, you can see up top that the extension rate for family violence ex parte TPOs to longer term orders is 42.4%. But if we pull the data for individual districts, we can compare. On the bottom, you see the extension rate for Judicial District 5, which is Fulton County. The extension rate there is only 28.6%. Our hope is to also work towards isolating data to smaller locations as well, such as judicial circuit or county. But we have some work to do before getting there in report form. But our hope will be that we can provide that to communities in which we provide training or technical assistance moving forward. In the future, we will be looking at data from 2018 and beyond. 2018 marks the transition from summary-based family violence data to incident-based data, and we are very excited about the new analysis capabilities that will afford us. Capabilities such as incident breakdown by individual agency as well as county, monthly and seasonal analyses, a better understanding of how family violence fits into overall crime rates, and more information about victim-offender relationships. Thank you for your time. The 2013 to 2017 Family Violence Statistics and Trends Report is available in the Conference Resource Library and on our website. And Niki and I are available for any questions that you may have.
Thank you. Have a great day.